Hello and welcome to Partners with Nature, a podcast brought to you by Copert Biological Systems. I'll be your host, Greg Estes, and I'm guiding you through the world of biological control agents designed to help growers manage the dependency of harmful pesticides and other chemicals to combat pests and diseases. Oof, I'll admit, I was challenged to come up with a sentence that encompasses all that is going on with biocontrols. I'll just say bear with me. We have so much to cover and learn about. For now, our aim is to educate the listener on what's happening out there today, what's around the corner, and finally, whether or not the show has earned Jeremy and I another week's vacation. That sounds pretty good. Now for a quick rundown of our show and some history about our company. Copert Biological Systems was founded in 1967 by Jan Copert near Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Jan was a cucumber grower who developed an allergic reaction to the pesticides he was using. This allergy spurred him to explore natural alternatives for pest control, which led him to the local university where they were working with predatory mites for the biological control of two-spotted spider mite. The predatory mite was called Phyllocilus prisimilis, and after a few experiments with this new predatory mite and a couple of successful crop cycles, Jan's entrepreneurial spirit kicked in. He began rearing prisimilis in his backyard and began selling it to other growers in his neighborhood. Hence, prisimilis, also known as Spidex, became Copert's first beneficial organism on the market. The company has been growing steadily ever since, adding insects, nematodes, pollinators, and microbials to the product portfolio. Today, Copert has subsidiaries in over 26 countries, the United States being one, and ships to over 90 countries around the globe. Berkel in Rodenrijs. I imagine our guest today will laugh about that. We'll ask him later. Near Rotterdam in the Netherlands is home to our production facility. Hopefully, we'll take this podcast on the road to the homeland. Stay tuned for a future episode from our production facility across the pond. As I mentioned, my name is Greg, and I'm a technical sales representative with Copert in the Pacific Northwest. I guess you can say I'm doing my part to keep Portland weird. What does that mean exactly anyway? Weird is everywhere, after all. Then again, I recently saw the Unipiper. If you don't know who the Unipiper is, he is a unicyclist who plays the bagpipe. He might be worth the Google, as they say. Check him out. Needless to say, I represent the truest form of layman. What I mean by that is I don't come from a background of entomology, botany, or microbiology. Hopefully this translates to listeners of all types tuning in with us as we explore together. With me in studio is my producer and fellow Copertino, Jeremy Seneft. Jeremy is a technical consultant who calls Santa Barbara, California home. I know, poor Jeremy. I don't feel so bad for you, buddy. Nice riff, by the way, as we started the show. Maybe next time we'll go for some speed metal.
I'll work on it.
Yeah, would you please? Amp it up. On to the format. Each episode, Jeremy and me will delve into a specific topic revolving around how biocontrols are utilized in our everyday lives as representatives of Copert. We will conduct an interview with an expert on said topic. From there, we'll have a discussion about a specific pest or disease that has recently given us grief, or perhaps one that our listeners have written in about. Yes, by the way, if you'd like to write in, please feel free to do so. We would love to hear from you. Any kind of feedback or questions you can send to podcast@copert.com. And for future episodes, then, we'll start off by getting into some of that Q&A from the prior. All right, enough said. Let's dive in. Biological control techniques as we know them today emerged back in the 1870s. However, documented use of insect species to battle pests dates way back to 304 AD, the Western Jin Dynasty. When I hear Jin Dynasty, I'm not thinking about pests. What about you, Jeremy?
What Jin are you talking about?
Exactly. You can get lost in that conversation. We're going to stay focused. Ants and ant nests were used to hang in fruit, namely citrus trees, to minimize damage by pests to the fruit. Now, I know a ton of history exists between now and then, but in the interest of time for our inaugural episode, I'm jumping forward to greenhouses. The Netherlands is often regarded as the mothership of greenhouse development. In fact, did you know that there are over 9,000 hectares? There's that word again. Hectares.
You're such an American, Greg.
I know. Or approximately 22,500 acres of greenhouses in Holland. Yeah, let's just pause for a second. For those American football fans, that's 17,000 football fields. You can actually see these greenhouses lit up at night from space. And I'll just let that segue into how Copert is playing a big role in today's topic, greenhouse-grown veggies. When we come back, we'll be joined by Ferdy van Elswyk, largely regarded as the king of hydroponic-grown vegetables. I know, Jeremy's got that grin on his face. It is quite the title. We'll have to take that up with him. I'm not sure how he got it, where he got it. That's how he's known on the streets, kids. We'll be back with Ferdy in just a moment after this brief word from today's sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by Spidex. Spidex is the Copert product name for the predatory mite Phytocilus persimilis. Fittingly, as we launch our first podcast episode, Spidex is our first sponsor. Spidex was the first Copert product available commercially, and for over 50 years now, it has proven to be an irreplaceable biocontrol measure against 2-spotted spider mite. Spidex can be used in just about every crop and growing environment, is available worldwide, and is the preferred choice for spider mite control. Spidex is packed in a variety of bottle sizes and carrier materials. Contact your local Copert representative for pricing, shipping, and other technical information relevant to your crop and location. Also, check out our website at www.copertonline.com/CopertSpidex.
All right, we're here in studio with King Ferdy. How you doing, Ferdy?
Very well, Greg. How are you?
Awesome. I'm good. First and foremost, obviously, thanks for coming to join us.
No problem.
Wait a minute. It's not really accurate. I joined you. I mean, we're recording from the Oxnard office after all. I'm from Portland. Ferdy, you know what? First and foremost, please pronounce your name correctly, as I just learned that I mispronounced it in the intro. How do you say your name correctly?
Ferdy van Elswyk.
Yeah, I'm not going to try that.
Don't worry about it. People have butchered it way worse.
And maybe that's how you got your name, King Ferdy. Nobody could really say your name.
It's easier to pronounce, right?
Correct.
Also pronounce the location of the office.
Oh, yes.
Berkel.
Berkel en Roderijs.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
If you want to rewind to what I said. Perfect. I appreciate that. We could use a little help with the Dutch language. I tell you what, it's not an easy language to learn. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us and our listeners an idea about your background. Maybe we'll start there.
Cool. Yeah, like I said, my name is Ferdy van Elswyk. I'm 42 years old. I'm from Holland originally. Been living in the U.S. for a couple of years now, and one of my responsibilities are in the greenhouse industry because that's my passion, and I've done this my whole life. When I was 10, I started working in my uncle's greenhouse. He's got tomatoes, and I think I picked up the passion from there. My grandpa always had greenhouses, first grapes, later followed by tomatoes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And poinsettias for Christmas. So I think, as long as I can remember, I've been taking baby steps in greenhouses, and I've actually had aunts and uncles set up a baby pen on the center path and have their kids play as we are picking tomatoes.
Wow.
So it's
It doesn't sound that fun, I'll be honest.
It is fun. It is fun,
I guess you can make it fun.
True, and especially if you work with a group of uncles and aunts that are pretty innovative in the way that they approach the greenhouse industry. My uncle was one of the first to use bumblebees in his tomato facility already in 1990, which is officially 1 year after the introduction of bumblebees.
Oh, neat.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about bumblebees today for sure.
Oh, cool. So, and for me, I next to the horticultural industry, I have a little passion for cars too. So right around 1990, the Mazda MX-5, the Miata in the US came out. And I wanted to collect enough money, so when I'm 18, because that's the legal age that you can drive a car in Holland,
Sure.
that I would have enough money to buy that car.
I got to tell you, I'm going to stop you there because I'm a tall guy. I'm like 6'5". You're also a tall guy. I would have never considered a Miata as a vehicle that you would be comfortable in.
I think at that age I was a lot smaller.
Yeah, so you've grown as I'm sure.
No, I did look at the Miata later, and it wasn't the car for me. So,
Okay.
But it's about your
Image.
No, it's about your childhood dream, maybe.
Okay.
And if that requires a little bit of money, in the greenhouse industry, is a labor-intensive industry. About a quarter of the cost price from tomatoes comes from labor in Holland. So if I would, shout out to my uncle, can I work in your greenhouse after school? I was always welcome. I could always make a couple of hours and earn a few guilders, it was back in the time, which is now euros, of course, in Holland.
Right.
But, yeah. So
Fascinating. Well, we've got obviously a good picture then of how you came into this through your upbringing, through your family history, so to speak. But talk a little bit about your schooling. Did you do your schooling as well in Holland, or what did you pursue educationally?
I studied horticulture in Delft.
I believe you guys call it academia. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, you got university levels. I'm actually one level lower than university, which is called higher professional education.
Okay.
In Dutch, they call it HBO. But regardless of that, that is, I would say, the more practical side of studying horticulture. There's also a more, like you said, academic side to horticulture as well. But there's definitely a difference between the two educations. The people that do horticulture in the university, they oftentimes become researchers. And I like research, but I prefer the practical side of the, being in the greenhouse and
Sure.
walking
More of
through
a
the plants,
hands-on
and hands-on
person.
guy.
Okay.
So I thought that education was better suited for me.
Awesome. Okay, that's cool. As far as your career path and how you got into biocontrols, was that pretty much predestined from the time you sounds like you were already well in the know of what you wanted to do at a young age? Did it play out that way for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I didn't know that I was going to work for a company in biocontrol. I mean, other than, helping my uncle out in his tomato greenhouse and filling the little bottles on the side of a bumblebee hive. That was my responsibility. That had to be done once a week. So I did that every Saturday morning, go through the whole greenhouse, which was a pretty large greenhouse for its time. It was 2 hectares, which would be the equivalent of a 20-hectare greenhouse today, pretty much.
There's that word again, Jeremy. We did talk about hectare.
Oh, shit.
For,
20 hectares, 80 acres.
It's not quite 2.5 acres.
That's 100 acres, actually. 20
But
hectares.
no, one hectare is 2.5 almost acres. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So 1 acre is 4,000 square meters. 2.5 times
Don't you
4,000
get
square
into the
meters is
metric
1
system
hectare.
That's great.
We always have this discussion in the company. Do we talk about hectares? Do we talk metric, or do we talk imperial? And there seems to be a mixture. I think
I'm all for metric. It's just I need to transition a little bit. I need to make the sacrifice and force myself to talk metric.
right.
I like a more universal approach to those conversations, but that's neither here nor there.
I understand what you mean.
So I appreciate those answers. That's great to know some of that stuff. As a matter of fact, we were just catching up the other day, and you told me a funny story that you used to collect bugs at a very young age and put them in pins or something. Can you explain that again?
Yeah. In elementary school, we were using those ink-filled pens. They had these cartridges that, would run out after a little while. And it's basically a little cell with a cap on the back that you can, if it's empty, you can basically clean it out and put whatever in there, what you like. And I was, during the breaks in my elementary school, I was always collecting little spiders, little beetles, little ants, and I would throw them in these little capsules, and I would close the back and store it on my desk during the lessons. And I would be looking at them pretty much the whole day. And then at the end of the lessons, I would go out and release them back. So it's just temporary.
Yeah, that's a pretty good, don't you think, Jeremy? That's a pretty good indication that he was destined to be in this field. Me, on the other hand, I was more busy taking out my magnifying glass and burning ants and things of this nature. I don't know where that puts me in the conversation. But yeah, I didn't really expect to be in biocontrol either, but I tell you what, I love it. And I'm so happy to be talking to you because you are a fountain of knowledge, we call you. And with that, let's just jump into topic today. Hydroponic grown vegetables is a huge conversation. It's not one that I believe you and I can really cover in just one conversation. Maybe we'll have you back for future shows. So today I just kind of wanted to do some brushing by some general things, give you an opportunity to talk about what you're doing out there, what's around the corner, so to speak.
Yep.
And hopefully our listeners will be writing in, and if they've got questions, for you, we'll get back and we'll address some of those in future shows. As a reminder to the listeners, you can send those questions to podcast@copert.com. So, Ferdy, tell us, how do you view your role in working directly with the growers and the production managers that you obviously have face-to-face contact with, kind of revisiting that hands-on? How do you view your role in what you provide and what your goals are?
I would say that's different in the profession that you're trying to fulfill, of course. For Copert, I'm the crop team manager for hydroponics. That means that I'm responsible for the whole team of people that services the accounts. And basically what I try to bring to the table is my overall practical knowledge to understand, how do growers think, what do they find important. Crop protection can sometimes be like a blip on the radar for them when you compare it to some of the other topics. So I think, I liked, coming with that horticultural background. What I try to do is bring that knowledge to the team to help them understand how a grower thinks and feels and what he feels is important. And that's pretty much all I would say to that.
Okay, I'll play out that a little bit then. I guess that really kind of segued nicely into what I wanted to say next, which is, what are some of the things you think a grower needs to know before venturing into the world of biocontrols, if you will? Is there anything that you would advise, just in terms of what kind of commitment, what you're getting yourself into, what are the benefits, those kind of conversations?
Yeah. It's that's almost an ironic question, because a lot of the growers that we work with already have 20 plus years experience in using biocontrol. So for them, it comes really naturally. But obviously, I do see big differences in the way that our clients work with biocontrol. What is important is that you have to set up your organization in a way that you can deal with all the things that are critical success factors, basically. And what I mean by that is, for instance, a scouting team. You got to have a good scouting team in place. To be honest with you, that's not only a requirement for using biological control. Any grower that has a crop that wants to know what's going on in their crop needs to have a thorough scouting team. So that's one. Second of all, I think...
Now, when you say scouting team, we might have some people who don't really know necessarily what that means. Delve into that a little bit.
Scouting is basically the task of walking the crop, collecting data from the crop, like, every step. Do I see, how many spots of whitefly do I see? How many spots of spider mites do I see? And Copert actually provides tools for that. For instance, sticky cards, yellow sticky cards that are covered in glue. They're spread out in the crop, and after a week after applicant putting those out in the crop, you come back and you count the whitefly, aphids, leaf miners that are on there to make a good assessment of the pest population building up in your greenhouse. And based on that assessment, you determine, the grower together with the corporate representative that provides him with support, the strategy for the week to come. And that can be increasing or decreasing beneficial introductions if necessary.
Sure. No, that's great, because one of the aims of this program is to educate. And if there's one thing I find myself constantly having to remind my customer base or growers about is the commitment.
Sure.
Not only from the viewpoint that you're not necessarily talking about an overnight solution, but also a commitment in terms of the scouting, the collecting of the data, and being able to make decisions that involve future weeks, even months. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more, but I appreciate that. All right. So, we talked about it just a couple minutes back, but I definitely wanted to talk about pollination as well.
Yep.
Jeremy and I are actually going to be having the opportunity to meet with and speak to Christine Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
Christine Blum. Mm-hmm. She is our outdoor pollination expert.
Yes.
And I don't know that you being the king, maybe you're indoor. But what I'm trying to get at is we're definitely going to talk a lot about bumblebees in our next episode, but I definitely want to talk about it here with you. I know it's an important piece of what you do with hydroponic veg. You want to talk about that a little bit? Why is the bumblebee the preferred pollination tool in a greenhouse setting?
There's a lot of different reasons, but first and foremost, when you talk about pollination in vegetable crops, we're mostly talking about pollination in tomatoes. A tomato flower does not hold any nectar. It only holds pollen. So that already takes the honeybee out of the equation, because the honeybee wants to collect nectar from the flower and bring that back to the hive in order to make honey, as a reserve energy supply. A bumblebee, actually a larvae of the bumblebee, prefers pollen over nectar. So they collect pollen from the flower of the tomato and they bring that to the hive back so that the larvae are fed with pollen. So that is already a big benefit of using bumblebees. Second benefit of using bumblebees is the fact that they do something that's called buzz pollination. They're using their muscles that are connected to their wings in order to strongly.
Christine, she'll have at us.
It might be different
this is fascinating stuff.
for
I love
Christine's bumblebees.
Yeah.
So the buzz pollination basically means that the bumblebee is holding on very strong to the flower of the tomato with its mandrels.
Okay.
And by doing so, it actually damages the tomato just a little bit, not the fruit, but the flower. And by those scarring of the flower, we can actually tell how well that flower has been pollinated.
Right. So this is actually,
It helps.
first of all, for our listeners, I had the opportunity, I should have mentioned this earlier, to visit with a local grower and to walk through the production facility and learn firsthand what our team is doing with hydroponic veg, and it was super neat to see. It's not something that I have a ton of familiarity with, but as far as the bumblebee portion of the conversation goes, I can't tell you how impressed I was. I mean, they really seem to be having like an organized work day.
Yes.
They were not bothering people were not bothering them, and they seemed to be flying in very distinct patterns, almost like it was an airport, so to speak.
Yeah, they're extremely dedicated to the job. I mean, they got like in that brood of the hive, there's going to be 150 larvae. I don't know if they're screaming for food, but it sounds like they are, because these bumblebee workers, and there's only 80 to 100 in a hive, so that's the majority are larvae that they need to feed. So and they're really diligent in trying to collect all that pollen from the crop.
Right.
And
I can't get Jeremy to feed me. My producer, he just sits there. He doesn't bring me anything, water, food. Yeah, maybe these bumblebees could be trained. Let's get into some of the biocontrol things outside of pollination.
Yeah.
So talk to us about what are the major concerns when we delve into pests, diseases. So I guess let's just stick with tomatoes for the time being, because I know that's a big portion.
Well, before we go into the pests and diseases, I think it's good to understand that the reason why a lot of our growers are using biological control is first and foremost is because they're using pollination with bumblebees. You can understand that if you start using natural pollination with bumblebees, that you cannot continue to spray heavy chemicals for all the other pests that are in your greenhouse.
Excellent point.
So these two things, they come together. And this is I think one of the reasons why corporate has become so successful in the hydroponic vegetable industry is, first of all, because we supply very high quality bumblebees, and 70% of the market in the US is using our bumblebees. So that has a spin-off that people are using more bios as well.
Sure.
And when you look at tomatoes, for instance, whitefly is the number one pest. And we release a couple of different beneficials and a couple of different strategies. It depends on, are you talking about a summer planting or a winter planting? Does it have artificial light, yes or no? But the whole idea behind it is to have the generation buildup of whitefly not to be successful. And we use, for instance, Encarsia, a parasite that parasitizes the larvae of whitefly. They actually deposit their egg in the larvae of the whitefly, and that results in a whitefly not reaching adulthood, but a parasite actually hatching from the larvae of the whitefly.
Doesn't he explain that so nicely, Jeremy? Because when I try to describe it, I always fall back to the movie Alien. which is not a nice way to describe it, but I enjoy it. But that was well done. Thank you.
Agree.
Yeah, maybe we
I've
just get you to
explained it
do a
once or
catalog
twice
of all of
before.
our products,
Yeah.
and you can explain what each one does nicely like that. So outside of Incarcia, whitefly, are there other things that you deal with on a regular basis?
Other pests, you mean?
Sure.
Yeah, spider mite is, I would say, the number two pest for tomatoes. And kind of the same thing applies to
Isn't it
bumblebees.
amazing that even in a greenhouse setting, where in my opinion, what I saw, there's quite a bit of attention put into keeping pests out, sanitation, I should say.
Yeah.
And yet the mites still find their way in. It's,
True, but you also have to consider that there's a lot of nooks and crannies where they can hide. So when you rotate your crop and you plant a new crop, that plant actually emits a lot of signals that the spider mites and the whitefly can pick up on, and it's a new buffet that's
dinner
being
time.
opened.
It's like
Yeah,
ringing
exactly.
that bell.
Yeah, it's exactly
This is
right.
crazy. Yeah, so you know what? I'm glad you brought up spider mite because here's another myth, I guess, and we talked about it a little bit, but hopefully you can set me straight again. We saw Persimmilus being used, or I saw,
Yeah.
and this to me was something that I was of the impression was not a viable solution.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about the toxicity of plants and all that. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah. It maybe it was 10 years ago that all growers were saying spider mite control has to be done chemically because there's no biological agent or natural enemy that can take care of spider mites in tomatoes. I think through renewed insights, and I don't want to, how do I put this? Put anybody in a bad spot or anything, but I mean, over time you learn new things about how to use existing beneficials.
Sure.
Persimmilus is one of corporate's oldest products. We had Persimmilus before we even had bumblebees.
Right.
1967 is when corporate started with Persimmilus. And
By the way, for our listeners can now tell we've all been schooled on what year we started and what our first product was. I also mentioned Spidex in our intro as being our first. As a matter of fact, they're sponsoring today's show.
Oh, very good.
So yeah, hey, let's plug it right now. Right? No, I think we already did that. Anyway, please go on. I love it.
So I think those renewed insights on using Persimmilus in tomatoes have really, really changed the mindset of a lot of growers. Also, we had to learn how to introduce it properly in tomatoes because each crop and pest combination has its own specific critical success factors, I would say. And maybe the way that we were working with that in the past in other crops like in cucumbers and peppers, where it's definitely not a discussion, Persimmilus works great. Up to 10 years ago, people didn't really think the same about using Persimmilus in tomatoes. And nowadays, it is performing way better than even using chemicals.
Sure.
Yeah. One of the reasons is that spider mite is able to go full circle in a matter of 10 days from egg to adult. And then they put the next generation out that can have 130 offspring, And if there's only one in that population that builds up a resistance for a certain chemical, in a very, very short time, the whole population will have that resistance of that chemical. So if out of any pest you're using biological control, it should be for spider mite because they are the quickest to build up resistance.
Right. I've seen it happen.
Exactly.
I don't want to cry right now. Not during this recording, but there's been some sad stuff.
Yeah.
It's a frustrating pest, but I definitely have also had some great success stories and seen up close and personal what Spidex is capable of. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
But tell me again about this toxicity conversation.
Yeah.
Explain that for us, would you?
Yeah. So what a tomato plant does, and it's not unique because some other plants do that too, is that it produces a certain defense mechanism in the plant, which actually is not there when it's just a seedling or just a transplant, but over time when it builds up almost to the level that you first start to harvest from it, at that time it starts to produce acyl sugars, and acyl sugars are toxic to a lot of pests. For instance, that is one of the reasons why aphids do not like tomatoes. You rarely see aphids. There's only a couple species of aphids that can survive on tomato plants. And that's because of those acyl sugars. But we also use insects and mites for biological control. So we also have to test out if the beneficials that we use are not affected by those products that the plants emit. Now, we found that, for instance, a natural enemy like Swarovski, which is a predator for whitefly and for thrips and has a side effect on spider mite.
It's another mite, right?
It's another mite, yeah. It comes from a little sachet. You hang it in the plant, and over a period of 4 to 6 weeks, it emits a couple of hundred mites in the crop. And that particular insect is affected by those acyl sugars. So we can use
Bertie,
it.
this is
Yeah.
my chance to correct you.
Okay.
My mentor would be so proud of me right now. You can't call a mite an insect.
That's true. Yeah.
Jeremy,
It's one of
did you
those
catch that?
beneficials.
I hope you
You're
get
right.
this. Yeah, see? That's the only time I ever get to correct the king.
How long were you waiting for
Yeah,
that?
listen, did you see how excited I just got? Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So indeed, a mite is not an insect; it's a beneficial. In the case of Swarovski, it is taken it about 8 to 10 weeks for it to successfully colonize the plant and help you out on whitefly control. But as that plant gets older, starts to produce more acyl sugars, and at that time we stop introductions of Swarovski. It doesn't work anymore. But for interplanting situations, and I'm sorry for the technicalities and everything, but interplanting is where an older crop is overlapping the planting of a new crop. So it takes about 8 weeks from planting to first harvesting. But when you overlap in the same greenhouse 2 plantings, you actually can have a continuous production of tomatoes coming out of your greenhouse. The only downside of that is that all the pests that have been on your old plant now have seen that buffet opening up again with those young plants that are planted underneath. And that typically has a not so great effect on crop protection as a whole, because on young plants, for instance, whitefly, they lay more eggs, so they become more successful, and you can't really spray a young plant that sits underneath an old plant. The leaves are covering each other, basically. It's like a big jungle of plant material. So the only real way to seriously and successfully combat that is through biological control. And that's why we also come up with these systems that work for interplanting situations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's all been thought out, huh? That sounds pretty intricate. What do you think?
Indeed. Too depth? Too much depth?
Did you
you'd
see
say?
that? That was an ode to the Dutch. Indeed. Great. So the transition here a little bit. I'd like to talk to you about really what you see as the future of greenhouse production, particularly here in the States.
Yeah.
We obviously talked about your background, coming from the mothership, if you will, of greenhouse veg, greenhouse in general. Here in the States, where would you put us in a global conversation? Are we
Very small.
small? It's a
Yeah.
small thing for us. As a matter of fact, our neighbors to the south and to
Yep.
the north
Yep.
both have much more production going on right now than we currently do.
Correct.
So with that kind of knowledge, where do you see things going here in the States next 10, 15 years?
Well, I'm sure that the greenhouse industry has a great future in the U.S. When you just look at the ratio, it's so much different from any other country. It's highly undervalued. When you look at the acreage of greenhouses here in the U.S. in ratio to the people that live here, in the U.S. there's 20 times more people than in Holland. But we almost have 20 times more greenhouses in Holland than you do in the U.S. So there's an offset there that has to be corrected.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it is true that countries around the U.S. are supplying the U.S. With product, countries like Mexico, Canada. However, I've also noticed that American consumers have been asking for locally produced product as well. So that means that when you think about CO2 emissions, when you think about efficient production, it is sometimes smarter to produce very close to a big city, have a greenhouse next to a big city, and produce the food right around the corner, so you don't have to truck it 1,000 miles or more to get it to your doorstep. And then, the other benefit is that greenhouse that is placed next to a big city can also provide labor opportunities for the city.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of a double-edged sword, and I think a lot of a lot of greenhouse owners start to see that, and that's one of the reasons why corporate has put me in place as the crop team manager, because now all these new facilities are popping up all over the place, but all of them require the same tactical approach. And a greenhouse owner does not like to work with 10 different companies, supplying them with 10 different stories and 10 different strategies. They want to copy what works, and therefore you need to work with a company like corporate that has global presence. We're working in more than 90 countries worldwide.
Yeah,
you know?
that's
Doesn't
crazy.
matter where you start up your facility, you're always going to have that high quality product and that high quality service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned there more of a high tech. You sent me that really cool link to a YouTube clip that you had put together a few years back, or maybe more recent than that. But talking about those high tech, what do they call them? Cogeneration greenhouses.
Yeah, correct.
It's interesting. Can you explain that real quickly? What that video really captures, and I'll tell you a little story that might be of interest to you.
Yeah, what cogeneration actually means is that you, and so first of all, you got to understand that normal greenhouses, what is normal, right? But conventional greenhouses use natural gas for heating, and they have a boiler and they feed that with natural gas, and that the only thing that boiler does is create heat. Well, with cogeneration, the big plus and the big upside of using cogeneration is that you still create that heat. But now you create it in a reciprocating engine. It runs on natural gas. And not only do you produce heat, you also produce electricity, which you can use for artificial light in the greenhouse. Or you can sell it back to the power grid if you don't need it. And then it provides a return on investment on your gas cost. But then the other benefit is that by burning natural gas, you get CO2 from the cogen. And that CO2 is used in the greenhouse as a fertilizer for the plants. Of course, it goes through many steps to purify it and all that. But basically, all the elements that come out of the cogeneration are of value to the greenhouse grower. The heat, the CO2, and the electricity. And that makes it, a very efficient way.
Yeah.
96% efficiency if you do the calculation right.
Right. Yeah, no, I know you haven't been up yet to the Pacific Northwest to say hi to me. There's not a ton of greenhouses up there that do greenhouse veg. But just to kind of give you a quick funny story, our regional director, Danny, he came up to visit me, and we went to a hop harvest. I work with hop growers. And one of his first comments was, wow, look at it, they're wasting so much heat.
Right.
They have a process during the harvest where they are drying the hops, and they use huge dryers. I think they're called kilns.
Okay.
And anyway, all this heat is escaping, and that was his first comment. My first comment was, look at all those hops. He's saying, what are they doing with the heat? Also a Dutch guy, so I'm sure he's very familiar with these high-tech greenhouses as well.
Yes.
And looking at that video is pretty awesome. You're certainly welcome to plug it if you want and tell our listeners where they can find it. But it was pretty cool to watch. I appreciate you sending that. So do you think that's a realistic place that we're going to be?
Oh, it's totally realistic. As a matter of fact, it's already happening. If you look at the Dutch electricity grid, it has 25,000 megawatt of installed capacity. Out of that 25,000 megawatt installed capacity, 3,000 is already CHP or cogen application in greenhouse. That means that 1/8 of the total grid capacity is electricity that is produced by greenhouse growers in Holland these days and for the last 10 years. To be honest with you, it's actually weird that the US hasn't picked up on this, because when you are putting a large hydroponic facility next to a big city, it should be combined with CHP, because then it not only provides food and labor opportunities, but it also provides for a more stable grid. And I've had the pleasure of meeting with Boris Zubkov. He's the Minister of Agriculture for Russia. And he came over to our greenhouses to talk about this, because he wanted to do exactly how we did that in Holland with all the major Russian cities. And they are doing that at this moment.
Wow.
They are doing this. Yeah.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, Jeremy, you got anything? We're going to do a quick break here and get you involved in a game, which you probably didn't know about, Ferdy. You're going to be playing a game with us. You have any questions, Jeremy?
You about covered it.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
he does. He's the king. Now you know why he's the king, people. All right, thanks. We'll be right back.
Knowing and Recognizing, the Grower's Guide to Biological Crop Protection. Now revised, expanded, and illustrated to give you a comprehensive overview of the most prevalent pests and diseases and ways of controlling them. Knowing and Recognizing does exactly what it implies. It empowers you with knowledge about the pest's life cycle and its many phases, as well as giving you the ability to recognize the pest or disease by means of detailed illustrations and close-up photographs. The knowledge gained will equip you to find the best sustainable solutions. First published 25 years ago and revised in 2003, the latest edition comprises 443 pages, 700 photographs, and dozens of illustrations of the most prevalent pests, diseases, and their natural enemies.
All right, we're back with Ferdy, and Ferdy, we're about to jump into a new game. Well, actually, it's not new at all. As a matter of fact, it's totally riffed. But we're going to have fun with the new game, or our game.
Sounds
we'll
good.
Two Truths and a Lie. Have you ever played before?
I have not, no.
All right, I'm going to read off to you 3 statements. All 3 revolve around the hydroponic conversation.
Okay.
And one of them's untrue, or the lie. You pick the lie correctly, you get a prize. I know you're pretty excited about the prize. I can't show you yet because you're going to be blown away. Are you ready?
Of course.
Okay. Number 1, Egyptian pharaohs insisted that fruits and veggies they loved were grown using a hydroponic system. Number 2, astronauts aboard the International Space Station are experimenting with a hydroponic system aptly called Veggie as one of their missions to develop food sources for long space travel past the moon. And number 3, a hydroponic grower can plant almost 5 times the crops with the same space as traditional farming. How do you feel? Those are your options.
Those last 2 were definitely true.
Do you want me to read them again?
So the space one and the efficiency of space, I would say, apply to the hydroponics. I don't believe about the
You
first
don't believe in
one.
the pharaohs?
No.
Why?
I believe in
Is it
I
a
believe in
conflict with the
pharaohs,
king?
but I don't think.
Is it a conflict with the king thing? Because there can
No,
only really be one
maybe a little
king.
bit. Yeah, that's true. And I think they had other things on their mind during those times. Yeah.
They were pretty smart people, though. I mean, they first language, right? Maybe we shouldn't get into that conversation. I don't know what I'm talking about. In any case, you're wrong, Ferdy.
Oh.
You are wrong. I got you on a technicality. I wanted to see how detailed you were. The hydroponic grower can plant 5 times is incorrect. It's 4 times.
Okay.
So I know that's a mean question, but thank you for playing. Yes. Yeah, I don't know if does that sound accurate to you? Because in talking to Jeremy, he thought it was even more than that.
In terms of place efficiency? You
Yeah.
mean? For sure, place efficiency is a high thing because, when you look at the overall production out of a tomato field outside, growers can typically get between 5 to 15 kilos per square meter per 10 square foot, 20 pounds, that is.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's easily 5 times more in a greenhouse.
So maybe you were correct.
Well,
Maybe there is no loser here. Everybody's a winner. If you look over your left shoulder, I've got a little hat there for you.
cool.
That's a Copert hat, and on it, you'll see my favorite, the hop.
Nice. I like that
Yeah,
one.
right?
I like
I
that
know
one.
you'd be excited about that. You should put that on.
Awesome.
Feel good about it. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
playing with us.
Thank you.
A few other fun facts about hydroponics, and certainly jump in if you got some things you want to discuss. 90% less water usage.
Yeah.
Is that a recycling conversation, or is it actually really use that much less because
Yeah.
it's not a soil conversation?
Yeah. Well, no, it's completely true. If you look at how much water you need in an outdoor field, that it all has to do with evaporation, of course. So when you irrigate a plant that's out in the field, some of that water is taken up by the plant. Some of it is, transpiring through the water in the soil. But the majority of it is evaporating from the plant. So when you look at the net amount of water that actually is converted into tomatoes, let's keep it at that, it's actually very, very minimal. You need about 20 liters of water to make 1 kilo of tomatoes out there in the field. If you do that hydroponically in a greenhouse, first of all, the water that you give can be higher. So you can, per square meter, you can give more water to the plant. but the uptake is also more efficient. But the water that is not taken up is not a loss. It is collected, is filtered and disinfected, and then reapplied with fertilizer if needed. If it is good, they won't do it anyway, and they just add water, and they reapply it to the plant. So it's a closed loop system that constantly feeds the tomatoes and all the other hydroponic vegetable plants. And when you do it correctly, you can actually go down to 1.2 liters of water for every kilo of tomatoes that you produce. Wow. And Greg, that comes from the fact that you have that fully closed loop of irrigation.
Sure.
But the water that is evaporated by the plants in a lot of these greenhouses nowadays, when you cool a greenhouse, you actually condensate a lot of the moisture that's in the air. And the moisture in the air comes from the plants that are evaporating. So not only do you get your recirculation water back, you also get the water back from evaporation. And those two together make it an extremely efficient system.
That's pretty efficient. It's a lot more efficient than I am.
Yeah.
Don't look at me like that, Jeremy. Yes, another fun fact, twice as fast. I'm assuming that just basically breaks down to harvest twice as fast.
Yeah, it's about the 24-hour temperature that you need. You know, you need a certain amount of degree days, we call it in the greenhouse industry. So it's time multiplied by temperature. And when you do, greenhouse growing, you can just, provide a better circumstances for the crop.
Yeah.
And then,
perfect nutrients.
Perfect nutrients, but also perfect temperature, perfect conditions for that plant to grow.
Nothing like the chicken bowl I ate today from Chipotle. But it was delicious regardless. Last one here. And this one I think is really cool. I like some of this war history. I always find it fascinating. So I read that back in World War II, that the gravel system was something that was indoctrinated for the U.S. troops so that they could feed all the troops overseas fresh veggies. Of course, that's a huge, got to get your vitamins, right? So I thought that was pretty cool, too. And that also brings up the point that there's more than just indoor hydroponic systems. There's also outdoor.
Yes.
Do you work with both, or is it all indoor?
Corporate works with both. I mean, if you talk to Christine in your next podcast, maybe you will hear what corporate does in the outdoor fields when it comes to pollination, when it comes to biocontrol. One thing that I really find fascinating, and you asked me to plug something, and that would be my thing, is warehouse growing. And warehouse growing is something that if you ask me honestly, I thought that was actually a crazy idea. When you look at a greenhouse that's made out of glass, it has the sun emitting so much energy in your greenhouse, it's basically a free energy source, right? So why would you switch that one off by closing the roof above the tomatoes, above the crop? But I visited Japan a few times, and I was talking to large corporations like Mitsubishi, Toshiba, Panasonic, and the idea that they had wasn't stupid. They were actually very, very smart people, because they said the benefit of us doing warehouse growing is that we can actually take out all the elements that we don't have a grip on and replace them with elements that we can fully control. So what they are doing is they're using their warehouses that were previously used for chip manufacturing, and there's a lot of competition in that market. So there's warehouses that are obsolete, or don't stand the test of time, and they're converting them over to greenhouse crops. So not a greenhouse crop as we know it, but a closed-off warehouse, because they have the technology in-house. Think about it. They have the solar panels. They know best out of everybody in the world how to produce efficient solar panels, but they also have the knowledge in-house about how to do LED lighting. So if you combine those two things together, then it doesn't become such a strong and crazy idea to switch off that natural sunlight, because you can make that light that falls on your solar panels, you can convert it into light that you can control. And that's the overall idea for a country like Japan. They're 70% depending on importation. So only 30% of their product is right now produced there because they've got a very limited space of land available to them.
Yeah.
They're very, very sea-locked, right? There's no way for them to expand. And there's
No,
a lot
this
of...
is my first to hear of this, so this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
So since I visited Japan for the first time, I started to think differently about warehouse growing. And I also think that also for the US, it's going to provide a couple of new chances. For instance, it doesn't have to be tomatoes. Maybe that's too difficult for now to start off with. But when you think about growing hydroponic lettuce, for instance, which is just a very low crop, you can make it multi-layer, 7, 10 layers above each other. It's very easy. You can do it, on a very small footprint. You don't need a big warehouse, and you can do it very close to a big city. And all the climatic conditions outside don't matter anymore. You just build it so that it's the best situation for the lettuce to grow. And you can transport it over, a couple of miles, and it's fresh to the doorstep of the people. So I think that's really, when you talk about the future of agriculture and greenhouses in particular, there's some crops that they're gonna change into that direction of warehouse growing, for sure, no doubt.
Wow. Well, hopefully they'll be around.
Me too.
Well, listen, we are so pleased with you coming to visit with us today. Really love speaking with you. Like I say, I hope we have more opportunities. As you can tell, folks, there's a lot to talk about here, and we just kind of did a brush through. So, Ferdy, thanks again. Anything you want to plug again? Do you want to guide people to how to find the king, or do you want me to set that up at the end of the show?
CorporateUS.com. That's all I got to say.
There you go. Thanks for plugging us. Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone, and we'll call it a wrap.
Thanks for listening to Partners with Nature, the Biological Control Podcast brought to you by Copert Biological Systems. Check us out on the web at www.copertus.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.